Did Meghan Markle just make a move so brazen, so deliberately provocative, that it forced King Charles to draw a permanent line in the royal sand? It didn't happen on palace grounds. It didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in front of camera lights, velvet chairs, and the click of a luxury magazine's shutter. And it ended with the kind of royal retaliation that hadn't been seen in decades. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let's rewind. Meghan Markle, former working royal turned media mogul, walked into a glamorous New York filming location for Harper's Bazaar. She wasn't there to pose as a duchess or speak on behalf of the crown. She was there as herself, or so we were led to believe. But as she entered, a house manager formally addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen. Meghan, Duchess of Sussex." Wait, what? She's not supposed to use that, is she? In that one moment, 5 words, clearly spoken, it all changed. A title, a throwback, a spark to the powder keg of royal protocol. And just like that, the palace phone started ringing. You may be wondering, what's the big deal? Why is using a title she legally still holds such a problem? That's the question. And it's exactly the kind of confusion that has plagued the royal family since the Sussexes stepped down in 2020. Because in the world of royalty, symbolism is everything. A title isn't just an accessory. It's a declaration of status. It's power. And it's permission. So when Meghan Markle used the title Duchess of Sussex in a high-profile, commercial context, despite having rejected royal duty, accountability, and oversight, it was more than a name. It was a challenge. To King Charles, it was a line crossed. And this time, the consequences would be irreversible. But what really happened behind the scenes? Why now? And what forced King Charles to finally act? That's what we're about to unpack. Because this isn't just about protocol. It's about betrayal, power, and a royal house trying to keep its walls from cracking under global scrutiny. Let's break it down. The Harper's Bazaar interview itself was classic Meghan. Stylish, eloquent, on brand. The photos, cinematic. The lighting, flawless. The tone, confident, liberated. But there was something beneath the surface. An undercurrent. The piece, written by journalist Caitlin Greenidge, painted Meghan as a woman in full control. But then came the quote. A quiet, almost throwaway line, but one that would dominate headlines for weeks. The house manager had formally announced Meghan using her royal title, and Greenidge made a point to mention it. The context? Deliberate. The implication? Loaded. This wasn't just a staffer being polite. It was theater. And the audience? The monarchy. Some believe it was a passive-aggressive jab. Meghan reclaiming her narrative, subtly reminding the world of who she once was and who she still claims to be. Others see it differently. As a trap. A PR disaster. Public relations expert Renee Smith didn't mince words when she spoke to The Express. From a PR perspective, she said, it's such a bad idea. It's confusing. It's provocative in the wrong way. And it puts her straight back beneath the royal shadow she always bloody insists she wants to get away from. Ouch. And here's where the contradiction slaps us across the face. Meghan has spent the last 4 years declaring independence from the firm. Yet every time she steps into a camera-ready space, she leans back into the title. Why? Is it branding? Is it identity? Or is it simply habit? More importantly, how did King Charles react? Well, here's where things get even murkier. Because insiders say that this wasn't the first time Meghan used the title after stepping away. But this time, it came with theatrical flair, and that rubbed the palace the wrong way. Think about it. The woman who once told Oprah she felt silenced by the monarchy is now using that very identity as her microphone. So what's the message? And what does King Charles do when a former working royal publicly undermines the monarchy's boundaries again? Here's where the story takes a turn. Because this time, it's not just Charles fuming in private or aides drafting quiet statements behind palace walls. This time, the king acted. Royal insiders confirmed that within 48 hours of the Harper's shoot, a flurry of communications were exchanged between Clarence House and royal legal teams. Discussions about titles, public image, future protocols, and yes, consequences. Now here's the twist. Legally, Meghan is still the Duchess of Sussex. The title was bestowed upon her by Queen Elizabeth on her wedding day. It can't simply be taken back without formal action. But what Charles can do, what he has the authority to do, is ban her from using it in any royal or public-facing capacity. And insiders say that's exactly what he's done. A quiet but powerful directive was issued. Meghan Markle is henceforth barred from using the Duchess of Sussex title in any commercial or public setting. No more introductions. No more production credits. No more book bios. The title still technically exists, but it's now coated in royal frost. And the reaction? Explosive. Supporters of Meghan say it's vindictive. They claim Charles is trying to erase her from history, to punish her for being too independent, too loud, too American. But royal traditionalists argue it's long overdue. You don't get to leave the royal family, they say, and then dip back in whenever it suits your personal brand. You can't have the crown cake and eat it too. So where does this leave us? Well, in the middle of a royal Cold War. One that's quietly been building for years. A war not of bloodlines, but of boundaries, of optics, of legacy. And it all exploded over a single title. But here's the question that lingers like smoke in the air. Was this all part of Meghan's plan? Is she the victim of an antiquated system clinging to control? Or did she knowingly poke the bear again? To answer that, we have to go deeper. We have to examine the palace's response, the secret calls that followed, and what insiders say was the final straw for Charles. Because what came next wasn't leaked to the public. Not yet. But those who were in the room say it was the moment King Charles stopped being a frustrated father and started acting like a monarch. And it didn't end with a letter. It ended with a threat. Not to Harry, not to Meghan, but to the institution itself. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What does it take to push a monarch to the edge? A scandal? A betrayal? A single word? In this case, it was 5. Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. That was it. That was the line. Spoken not by Meghan herself, but by a house manager. Publicly, clearly, and with the weight of intention behind it. And it didn't happen on British soil. It happened in the heart of New York, in front of cameras, stylists, journalists, and Harper's Bazaar's high-powered editorial team. But make no mistake, it reverberated all the way to Buckingham Palace. Let's set the scene. It's a crisp autumn morning in Manhattan. The kind of day where the streets hum with quiet energy. Inside a rented film set designed to resemble an upscale brownstone, everything is in place. Lighting rigs are glowing. The coffee bar is stocked. Assistants, stylists, and editors are triple-checking their briefs. And then, the moment. Meghan Markle enters, poised, polished, every strand of hair perfectly placed. But it's not her entrance that sparks the storm. It's how she's introduced. The house manager, tasked with coordinating the space, pauses, clears his throat, and announces in a tone practiced and ceremonial. Ladies and gentlemen, Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. Silence. Some in the room don't even flinch. Others exchange quick glances. And somewhere, a journalist takes note. That journalist was Caitlin Greenwich. Sharp, precise, and curious by nature. She didn't let the moment pass. She included it in her write-up. And that inclusion, seemingly innocuous, would spark one of the most controversial episodes in the modern royal saga. Why? Because Meghan is no longer a working royal. And while she may retain the title and name, she agreed, explicitly, back in 2020, not to use it in a public, professional, or commercial context. That was the deal. That was the agreement. So why was it used? Was it a simple oversight? A moment of nostalgia? Or was it strategic? Here's where things get murky and messy. Some insiders claim Meghan had no idea the title would be used that way, that she didn't script the announcement, that it was someone else's decision, a staffer trying to be respectful, perhaps even reverent. But others? Others believe it was choreographed. Carefully, intentionally, and with a purpose. Because here's the thing, Meghan is no stranger to optics. Every move, every phrase, every frame is considered. Her background in Hollywood, her experience in the royal family, her dealings with Netflix, Spotify, Penguin Random House, these aren't accidents. They're strategy. So when that title was used in such a formal way, right before a major shoot, it wasn't just an introduction. It was a statement. And it sent shockwaves. One of the producers on set, speaking anonymously, described a distinct shift in the room afterward. You could feel it, the source said. Everyone suddenly stood straighter. It was like royalty had walked in. Now here's the twist. That kind of moment, where Meghan is treated as royalty, can be gold in Hollywood. It elevates the brand. It adds mystique. It signals importance. But in royal circles, it's the equivalent of slapping the king in the face. Why? Because that title represents not just a personal connection, it represents an institution, a lineage, a centuries-old monarchy built on order, tradition, and rules. And Meghan had broken them. Again, back in the UK, it didn't take long for the whispers to start. At Clarence House, aides were already fielding calls. Have you seen the piece? Did she really use the title? Is this another breach of the agreement? The reaction was swift and furious. Not necessarily because of the words themselves, but because of the pattern. This wasn't the first time Meghan had leaned into the Duchess brand, but it was perhaps the most public and undeniable. And that's what made it different. That's what made it personal. Let's rewind a bit. In 2020, when Harry and Meghan announced they'd be stepping back from royal duties, Queen Elizabeth issued a carefully worded statement. It was compassionate, but firm. They will no longer use their HRH titles, it said. They will no longer represent the crown. It was a clean break, a negotiated exit. But here's the catch. Meghan was allowed to retain the Duchess of Sussex title, as long as she used it appropriately. That meant no leveraging it for commercial gain, no weaponizing it in interviews, no deploying it like a brand label. But that's exactly what appeared to happen in New York. And that's what made this moment, this Harper's Bazaar shoot, so explosive. Public relations strategist Renee Smith summed it up in brutal terms. It's provocative in the wrong way, she told The Express. It confuses people. It blurs the lines between royal responsibility and personal branding. She added, it puts her straight back beneath the royal shadow she always claims to be fleeing. Let that sink in. A woman who famously rejected royal life, who described it as suffocating, isolating, and traumatic, is now using the royal title to bolster her presence in the media space. Is that contradiction? Or is it calculated? You tell me. Because this moment didn't happen in a vacuum. It came after months of speculation about the Sussexes brand struggling to find footing. Spotify had pulled the plug. Netflix deals were reportedly in flux. Public sentiment was shifting. So what better way to reclaim attention than by reinvoking the magic of royalty? Even if just for a moment. Even if it meant crossing a line. And here's the really fascinating part. Some insiders believe Meghan wanted a reaction, that she knew the palace would be watching, that by using the title so openly, she was daring them to act. Why? Because a royal rebuke, especially a public one, would only fuel the narrative. It would position her once again as the outsider, the rebel, the woman unfairly silenced by an outdated institution. It would reignite the Meghan versus the firm storyline that made her and Harry millions. But if that was the plan, she may have underestimated Charles. Because the king was done playing. Behind the scenes, royal aides say he was incandescent. Not just because of the title use, but because of what it represented. A breach of trust, a symbolic slap, and a reminder that the Sussexes still held a card the palace thought had been folded. And so Charles, for the first time in his reign, made a move that stunned even his closest confidants. He didn't issue a statement. He didn't call a press conference. He picked up the phone. And the person on the other end? That's still debated. Some say it was Harry. Others believe it was Meghan herself. But what's certain is this. What Charles said on that call would mark a turning point. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a plea. It was a decree. And it started a chain of events that would culminate in Meghan being permanently banned from using the Duchess of Sussex title in any official or public-facing context. Not just discouraged, banned. And as one royal insider put it bluntly, this was Charles saying, you want to play the game? Fine, but not with our pieces. Because for the king, this wasn't about revenge. It was about control, about drawing the line, finally, clearly, and publicly. And he wasn't done yet. Because the very next day, legal advisors were summoned. And what they uncovered, it didn't just involve Meghan. It involved Harry, the kids, the brand, the legacy, and a clause buried deep in the Sussexes' original exit agreement. One that hadn't been triggered until now. What did that clause say? And why did it have senior royals pacing the halls at midnight? The answer changes everything. What happens inside the royal palaces when the monarchy feels humiliated? What happens when tradition is not just disrespected, but publicly exploited? And more importantly, What happens when the person doing it used to be one of their own? Let's pull back the curtain. The moment the Harper's Bazaar feature dropped, complete with the now infamous line, Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, the energy inside Buckingham Palace shifted instantly. The phone started ringing, and the staff? They knew the drill. Silence. Urgency. Controlled panic. Because when the Duchess of Sussex title appeared in glossy print, not buried in the middle of the article but highlighted in the opening paragraph, it wasn't viewed as a harmless formality. It was seen as a declaration, a provocation, and King Charles wasn't having it. Sources close to the palace say it wasn't just a bad look. It was a deliberate undermining of the crown's authority. Let that sink in. This wasn't just Meghan using a title. It was, in the eyes of senior royals, Meghan using the monarchy to elevate herself, again, without giving anything back. No duty, no deference, no accountability, just the name. And for Charles, already grappling with the complex dance of modernizing the monarchy while preserving its mystique, this was personal. But before we get to Charles's reaction, let's look at the palace response machinery. Because yes, there's a system, a whisper network, an invisible chain of command that activates whenever the Sussexes make headlines. It begins with the comms teams. Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, Kensington Palace. Separate offices, each with their own advisors, strategies, and PR firewalls. But when a shared threat arises, when the institution itself is at risk, they synchronize. An emergency Zoom was reportedly scheduled between senior aides across the three households within hours of the magazine piece being published. One insider described the mood in that call as tense, clipped, and completely without small talk. The goal? Damage assessment. What did the article say? Was the title use authorized? Was there a precedent? And most importantly, how would the public interpret it? Because here's what the palace fears most: confusion. When the public is confused about what's allowed and what isn't, the monarchy's structure begins to wobble. If someone like Meghan can leave royal duties, criticize the institution in interviews, and still use her royal title in the media, what does that say about the monarchy's authority? What does it say about King Charles's reign? And here's where it gets even more interesting. According to one well-placed source, the first text that truly set things ablaze wasn't between staff. It was between royals. Specifically, from Catherine, the Princess of Wales, to her husband, Prince William. The message? She's doing it again. Now, this isn't the first time Catherine has reportedly raised quiet concern about Meghan's media tactics. But this time, it carried extra weight. Why? Because Catherine knows the importance of royal branding, of consistency, of discretion. She's played by the rules her entire adult life, staying silent when others spoke, staying present when others fled, maintaining grace even under relentless public scrutiny. So when Meghan boldly reinvoked her Duchess status in a luxury magazine shoot, Catherine saw it for what it was, an affront, not just to tradition, but to the institution that shaped all their lives. And she wasn't alone. Prince William was livid, not just because of the optics, but because of the hypocrisy. Remember, Meghan and Harry had, at length, expressed how toxic and confining the royal system was, how it silenced them, how it dehumanized them. So why continue to use the titles born of that very system? Why keep cashing in on an identity they claim to have escaped? These weren't just philosophical questions, they were operational ones. Because each time Meghan uses Duchess of Sussex publicly, it erodes the clarity of the monarchy's image. To put it bluntly, it makes the crown look weak, and that is something Charles cannot afford. Especially now, because Charles isn't just any monarch. He's the first new king in over 70 years. He's still defining what his reign will be remembered for, and allowing a former royal to blur the lines of authority, branding, and legacy? Not an option. So what did he do? He called a meeting. A private one. No media. No advisors. Just a handful of trusted aides and senior legal counsel. And what took place in that meeting, according to sources, was nothing short of a royal reckoning. Charles reportedly sat at the head of a long mahogany table inside the Clarence House strategy room. On the walls, portraits of monarchs past, each staring down, each a reminder of legacy. On the table, a single printed copy of the Harper's Bazaar article. Highlighted, annotated, circled in red pen were the words, Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. Charles began by asking a single question. Is there any ambiguity here? The room was silent, because the answer was clear. No, there wasn't. This was a breach of agreement, an exploitation of status, a bending of the rules that could no longer be ignored. Charles, known for his diplomacy, reportedly said this. If we allow the title to be used like this, we open the floodgates. Today it's Harper's Bazaar. Tomorrow it's Netflix. Then it's shampoo bottles. And after that, who knows? The line drew gasps. Not because of the exaggeration, but because of the underlying truth. The monarchy had lost control of its image once before, with Diana. Then again with Harry and Meghan's Oprah sit-down. Charles wasn't going to let it happen a third time. Not on his watch. So he issued a directive. Simple, firm, final. Going forward, the Duchess of Sussex title may not be used in any public or commercial engagement by Meghan Markle. If necessary, we will take formal legal steps. Boom. That was the moment. The line in the sand. And as one aide later said, you could feel the temperature in the room drop. This wasn't Charles the father. This was Charles the king. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Because Meghan's team was reportedly blindsided. According to Los Angeles insiders close to Archwell Productions, they didn't anticipate the palace would act so swiftly or so forcefully. In fact, they were in pre-production talks for a documentary series where Meghan would once again be introduced with her Duchess title in the opening credits. That's right, there were allegedly scripts already drafted, and branding decks, and digital thumbnails, all scrapped overnight. Why? Because after Charles's ban, continuing to use the title would not only spark legal backlash, it would ignite a PR firestorm, one that even Netflix might not want to touch. But if Meghan was rattled, she didn't show it. According to sources, her reaction was icy, detached, dismissive. She expected this, said one producer. In a way, I think she even wanted it. Because now, she could play the card she's always held in reserve. The silenced woman, the punished outsider, the royal scapegoat. It's a powerful narrative, one that made her millions the first time around. And if Charles thought this move would quiet her down, he may have just done the opposite. Because within 24 hours of the palace's internal ban, Meghan's team had already begun drafting responses. Not press statements. Scripts. Scripts for podcasts. For interviews. For a potential sit-down that, insiders say, could rival even Oprah's in rawness and emotional firepower. But Charles wasn't finished either. Because during that same meeting, while the aides packed up their folders and the legal team revised the paperwork, he quietly asked for one more document. The original Sussex exit agreement. Signed, sealed, archived in the Royal Archives. Why? Because Charles remembered something. A clause, buried deep in the paperwork, often overlooked, but now, suddenly, very relevant. A clause that could change the rules entirely, not just for Meghan, but for Harry, the children, and the future of the entire House of Sussex. What was in that clause? Why had no one acted on it before? And how could it become the monarchy's most powerful weapon? Or its most dangerous mistake? What came next wasn't a meeting. It was a message, and it would send shockwaves through both palaces and Hollywood. What do you say when the King of England is on the other end of the line? And more importantly, what don't you say? Because this wasn't a warm call. It wasn't a Christmas greeting. It wasn't a gentle father checking in on his son across the Atlantic. This was a royal confrontation, the kind that only happens when a line has been crossed. And the crown demands an answer. It began with a single call placed from a private secure line inside Clarence House to a number registered to a security-vetted contact in Montecito, California. The target? Prince Harry. But here's the twist. Harry didn't answer. That's right. Whether it was intentional avoidance or just bad timing, the king's call went to voicemail. And that, insiders say, sent the temperature in the room plummeting. Why? Because this wasn't just a phone call. It was an opportunity, a chance for Harry to de-escalate, to explain, to mediate. But it was missed. And so, 20 minutes later, Charles instructed his aide to dial a different number. This time it rang. And this time, it was Meghan who picked up. Let that sit with you. Because in all the post-exit negotiations, Meghan and Charles had rarely spoken directly. Communications usually passed through Harry, or through lawyers, or through aides. But now it was king to Duchess. No buffer. No spin. Just tension. And silence. The first words Charles reportedly uttered were chilling in their simplicity. "You know exactly why I'm calling." Not a question, a statement. And Meghan? She didn't deny it. According to sources with knowledge of the call, she responded calmly. "I imagined you might." A pause. The king, by all accounts, was composed, but direct. He laid it out, point by point. The Harper's Bazaar article had reignited public confusion over her status. The formal use of Duchess of Sussex constituted a breach of their 2020 agreement. The monarchy had no choice but to intervene. But here's where things got even more complicated. Because Meghan didn't back down. In fact, she reportedly pushed back, gently but strategically. She argued that the title is still hers, technically and legally. That no formal document has revoked it. That she has used it in limited and respectful ways, and never claimed to represent the crown. But Charles wasn't buying it. Because intent isn't the only thing that matters in royalty. Perception does. And right now, perception was chaos. The public didn't know where the line was. And the palace had to draw one. Meghan, according to insiders, then raised a point that stunned Charles into silence. "If I'm no longer allowed to use the title, does that mean I'm being erased?" Let that hit. Because that's the emotional landmine no one wanted to step on. Meghan framed the situation not as a legal overreach, but as exile, as erasure, as being written out of history for daring to walk away. It wasn't defiance. It was victimhood. And for a moment, just a moment, it shook the king. But then he answered, and his reply was reportedly sharp. "No one is erasing you, Meghan. But the institution cannot be used when it suits you, and discarded when it does not." Boom. That was the pulse of the entire issue. This wasn't about one article. It wasn't about Harper's Bazaar. It was about control. The crown believes it owns its symbols, its titles, its narratives. And Meghan believes she owns her story. Two immovable forces. One fractured family. But the call didn't end in anger. It ended in quiet resolve. Charles informed Meghan that a formal directive would be issued. That her use of the title Duchess of Sussex in public or commercial spaces would be considered a breach of agreement and potentially subject to legal restriction. And then came the line that has since echoed through palace halls and Hollywood boardrooms alike. "This is the last time we will have this conversation." Translation: the king was done talking. And when the call ended, Meghan didn't cry. She didn't scream. She did something far more powerful. She sat down, opened her laptop, and started writing. A source close to the Sussexes claims that Meghan immediately began drafting notes, not for a press release, but for a story. She knew the moment would become public, and she planned to control how it was told. Because here's the real game Meghan knows how to play better than any royal before her. The media narrative. You strike her down, she rises again. You silence her, she speaks louder. You take something from her, she turns it into content. And that's exactly what her team began preparing. Within hours of the call, Archewell advisors were in crisis mode. Not because they were afraid of losing the title, but because they saw the opportunity in it. The victim arc, the silencing, the monarchy flexing its muscle against the one woman who dared walk away and still shine. It was a script too good to ignore. And the next time Meghan appears in front of a camera, don't be surprised if the topic accidentally comes up. If the title becomes a talking point. If the emotional weight of being rejected, yet again, becomes the heartbeat of her message. Because Meghan understands something powerful. Sometimes losing a title makes you more dangerous than keeping it. Meanwhile, back in the UK, the fallout had already begun. Charles wasn't just dealing with the Sussexes. He was dealing with the press, the public, and the perception that he was either being too harsh or not harsh enough. Tabloids screamed in both directions. Some headlines read, "Charles slams door on Meghan for good." Others, "Petty palace strips title from modern woman speaking her truth." It was chaos. And within that chaos, the royal legal team began combing through the one thing that still held power over the situation. The exit agreement. That infamous 2020 document, drafted after weeks of negotiations with Queen Elizabeth's inner circle, Prince Charles, then the Prince of Wales, Prince William, and Harry himself. It contained dozens of clauses. Public, private, financial, legal. But buried deep in the second appendix was one line. One clause, one trigger, known only to a few. And that clause, once activated, would open a Pandora's box no one was fully prepared for. It wasn't about the Duchess title. It was about everything. The branding, the business, the children, and whether or not the House of Sussex could continue to exist at all. What did it say? Why had it been hidden? And who leaked its existence to the press just 24 hours later? That leak would spark the next royal crisis and bring someone unexpected, very unexpected, back into the fold. What does it actually mean to strip someone of a royal title? Is it just a formality, a polite request, or a declaration of war from the crown? Because in the case of Meghan Markle and the Duchess of Sussex title, the truth isn't just tangled in family drama. It's buried deep in royal legal precedent, unwritten rules, and centuries of strategic pageantry. And the clause King Charles is now prepared to invoke? It could unravel everything. But before we get there, we need to understand what makes a royal title so powerful and so controversial. Let's start with this. Meghan Markle is still, legally, the Duchess of Sussex. That title was granted to her by Queen Elizabeth II on the day she married Prince Harry, May 19, 2018. It was a gift, a symbol, a marker of her entry into the most exclusive institution on earth. Unlike peerage titles created for life or inherited, Duchess of Sussex was part of a royal marriage grant. And here's the important bit. It wasn't conditional. Not initially. But titles in the royal family aren't like job titles you can revoke with a quick HR memo. They're constitutional, ceremonial. They exist in a legal gray zone that combines royal prerogative, parliamentary tradition, and public expectation. So when Meghan and Harry stepped back from their royal duties in 2020, the issue of titles became a political powder keg. Queen Elizabeth made one thing clear. They will no longer use their HRH titles as they are no longer working members of the royal family. Notice the phrasing. She didn't say the titles were removed. She said they would not be used. There's a reason for that. Removing a peerage title, like Duke or Duchess, requires an act of Parliament. The monarch cannot unilaterally revoke it. It must be passed through both houses, like any other law. And historically, that very rarely happens. The last major instance? Prince Andrew. After the explosive revelations of his connection to Jeffrey Epstein and the civil lawsuit filed by Virginia Giuffre, Andrew was stripped of his military affiliations and was told he could no longer use his HRH title. But even he technically retains the title Duke of York. Let that sink in. The man accused of sexual misconduct by a trafficking victim still holds his title. And yet Meghan Markle, who walked away from royal duty but not into scandal, is now being banned from using hers. You can see the optics problem. You can see why some call it petty. But for the palace, it's not about fairness. It's about control. Because here's the thing. They can't strip Meghan of her title without political backlash and legislative hurdles. But they can, and now have. Issue a directive that bans her from using it publicly. It's like locking the door, even if her name is still technically on the deed. And that directive came directly from King Charles. So what are the consequences? In short, total brand decapitation. Meghan can't introduce herself as the Duchess of Sussex in public interviews, streaming content, business endeavors, or even red carpet appearances. The media is strongly discouraged from using it in headlines. And anyone associated with royal protocol, British press, government events, official charities, is under strict instruction not to acknowledge her by that title. It's the royal version of ghosting. But here's where the legal drama intensifies. Because when Charles made that call to ban Meghan from using the title, his legal team dusted off the 2020 Sussex exit agreement. And buried in that 34-page document, Appendix B, line 7, paragraph 3, was a clause nicknamed the sovereign's leverage. It's not public. It's not in the press. But insiders say it reads something like this. In the event that the titles of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are used in a manner deemed to conflict with the dignity or reputation of the crown, the sovereign reserves the right to suspend public usage rights and request formal parliamentary review. Boom. That's the weapon. Not removal. Suspension. Not by law. By prerogative. It gives Charles the ability to clamp down on usage without triggering an all-out constitutional crisis. He doesn't have to pass a bill through Parliament. He simply invokes the clause, issues a sealed notice, and informs the Privy Council. And that's exactly what he did. Quietly, formally, without fanfare. But when it leaked, Oh, the backlash was instant. Some corners of the press praised it as a long-overdue assertion of authority. Others called it a targeted attack on the only royal woman of color. It exploded across front pages. And the timing? Brutal. Because just 2 days earlier, Meghan had reportedly signed on to a new content deal, one that included children's books, a docuseries, and a lifestyle brand, all linked under the Duchess of Sussex umbrella. Now, that name is toxic, because no PR team wants to fight the crown, not even Hollywood. But here's the twist. This clause, the one Charles just used, wasn't meant for Meghan. It was originally drafted as a safety net for Andrew. Back in 2019, when rumors swirled about his dealings with Epstein, royal legal minds worked overtime to draft emergency protocols. The clause was included to provide flexibility in the event the monarchy needed to protect itself from association with a disgraced member. But when Meghan and Harry exited the royal fold, the clause was quietly extended into their agreement, just in case. And now, it's being activated not for a scandal, but for a title. Can you feel the irony? And here's where it gets personal. Because Charles isn't just invoking royal law. He's sending a message to his son and to the world that his monarchy is not to be trifled with, that branding and bloodlines are not interchangeable, that there are rules, and if you break them, even if you were once family, you're out. But here's the emotional landmine. While Meghan faces this public branding ban, Harry still retains his full title. He is still His Royal Highness Prince Henry of Wales, Duke of Sussex. And technically, so are his children, Archie and Lilibet, now Prince and Princess under Charles's reign. So the question becomes, why Meghan? Why isolate her when Harry continues to use royal credentials? Is it misogyny, racism, or simply convenience? Because let's not forget, Charles still harbors some hope, however faint, of reconciling with Harry. But Meghan? She's seen as the architect of the exit, the mouthpiece, the brand. She's the face of the rebellion. And the monarchy always punishes rebellion. Now let's zoom out. What does this mean for the future? For one, it signals a shift in Charles's reign. He's no longer playing diplomat. He's drawing hard lines. And that has ripple effects, not just for the Sussexes, but for the entire firm. Other royals are watching. So are world leaders. And so is the press. Because if Meghan, once welcomed with open arms, once touted as the modern face of monarchy, can be so publicly erased, then no one is safe. Not even blood. But Charles may have miscalculated. Because in removing Meghan's ability to use the title, he may have handed her something far more valuable. Martyrdom. Now, Meghan can position herself as the woman who dared challenge an ancient institution, only to be punished for surviving it. No scriptwriter in Hollywood could ask for better material. And if you think she's going to let that narrative go to waste, you don't know Meghan. But the clause has been triggered. The letter has been sent. And the world is watching what happens next. Because someone else has just entered the chat. Someone who's been quiet, strategic, waiting. And her name? Catherine. And what she reportedly said in a private meeting with Charles would send tremors through every palace hallway and make headlines that even the king couldn't control. What happens when the quietest royal becomes the most powerful one in the room? When the woman known for restraint, grace, and unwavering poise finally speaks, and everyone stops to listen. That's exactly what happened when Catherine, Princess of Wales, stepped into the Sussex title saga. Not with a press release, not with a smirk or a public dig, but with a single, chilling line whispered behind palace walls. And according to insiders, it changed everything. Let's rewind. At the time of the Harper's Bazaar controversy, Catherine had just wrapped up a solo charity visit in Manchester. She had smiled for the cameras, shaken hands with children, spoken passionately about mental health. All very on-brand. All very expected. But behind the scenes, she was fuming. Multiple sources confirmed that when Catherine first read the magazine's account of Meghan being introduced as Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, she was absolutely livid. Not because of jealousy, but because of what it represented. Catherine had spent nearly 2 decades inside the royal family. She understood the cost of that life, the relentless scrutiny, the unforgiving spotlight, the pressure to be perfect. But she also respected the rules. And watching Meghan, who had walked away from royal duty, continue to exploit the brand from a penthouse filming set in Manhattan, It was too much. So she did something she rarely does. She requested a private audience with the king. Now, this wasn't ceremonial. This wasn't staged for optics. This was personal. According to royal insiders, the meeting took place at Sandringham, an unannounced, off-calendar visit that caught even senior aides by surprise. Catherine reportedly arrived without fanfare. No press, no photographers, just her, a leather-bound notebook, and a conviction sharpened by 4 years of quiet observation. She wasn't there to gossip. She was there to intervene. What was said in that room has been tightly guarded, but leaks, as always, find their way through palace cracks. Here's what we know. Catherine didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She presented. She laid out, methodically, how Meghan's continued use of royal titles was muddying the institution's image, confusing the public, and undermining the core message of monarchy. Duty before self. And then she said it. The line that stunned Charles into silence. If we don't protect the meaning of our titles, then what do any of us stand for? Boom. A rhetorical question, but one that sliced through decades of tradition, pain, and pageantry. Because Catherine wasn't just talking about Meghan. She was talking about all of them. The Windsors, the Waleses, the monarchy itself. Titles aren't accessories. They're contracts. Silent, symbolic vows between the crown and the people. And when someone who no longer serves that purpose uses the title like a badge of prestige, or worse, like a marketing tool, it poisons the well. Even if she once wore the crown's favor, even if she once walked behind Queen Elizabeth, Catherine, in that moment, wasn't acting as a sister-in-law. She was speaking as the future queen. And Charles heard her, because as much as he adored Harry, and, once, even admired Meghan, he knew Catherine was right. The monarchy can't afford blurred lines. Not now. Not with his reign under constant surveillance. Not with the Commonwealth fracturing. Not with Republican sentiment bubbling beneath the surface of every former colony. So when Catherine left the room, Charles made a decision. Final. Unwavering. He would move forward with the full enforcement of the usage ban on the Duchess of Sussex title. No exceptions. No wiggle room. And here's the kicker. The final wording of the directive. The one issued internally and passed down through every major British institution, came from Catherine's pen. Yes, you read that correctly. The Princess of Wales didn't just offer counsel. She drafted the language. Lawyers later refined it. Yes. But the spine of the statement? The tone? The balance between formality and finality? All Catherine. And it shows. Because the statement, which was eventually leaked to select members of the press, read not like a royal condemnation, but like a quiet closing of a door. The sovereign recognizes the valuable contributions made by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex during their time as working members of the royal family. However, in light of ongoing developments, the public use of noble titles by individuals no longer serving the crown is hereby discouraged, with immediate effect. There's the word, discouraged. Soft enough to sound civilized. Sharp enough to signal war. But Catherine's involvement didn't stop there. According to senior aides, she requested that the title ban not be weaponized by tabloids, that there be no public humiliation, that the story remain contained, civil, private, honorable. Why? Because Catherine understands the long game. She knows that public spectacle weakens the crown. She knows that scorched earth never looks regal. And most importantly, she knows Harry is still Charles's son, still William's brother, still the father of royal children. There has to be a bridge left standing, even if it's just one stone wide. And that's why her role in this drama is so fascinating. Catherine is often framed as the palace's golden girl. Silent, elegant, polished. But in truth, she's the monarchy's strategist, the steady hand behind every carefully calculated step. And in this case, she played a masterstroke. Because here's what her intervention accomplished. It pushed Charles to act, without seeming like he was acting out of anger. It shut down Meghan's brand play, without sparking public outrage. And it reasserted royal boundaries, without descending into pettiness. All with one line, one meeting, one note. That's power. Not the loud, brash kind Meghan has mastered, but the silent kind. The kind that shifts tectonic plates without anyone seeing the movement. But make no mistake, it was a power move. And Meghan felt it. Sources close to the Sussexes say Meghan was deeply rattled, when she learned that Catherine had been the one to urge the ban forward. Not because of rivalry, but because of the symbolism. Because for Meghan, Catherine represents everything she fought against. Obedience, tradition, submission to an institution she felt never embraced her. And now, that very institution, through Catherine, had silenced her again. It stung. It stung more than any tabloid headline, any royal protocol, any Netflix smear. Because it wasn't the men of the firm this time. It was a woman who used to be her ally, or at least her equal. And that's where the tension sharpens. Because as Meghan was digesting the title ban and preparing a response, word reached her that there was one more move coming, one more decision. And this time, it wasn't about her. It was about Archie and Lilibet. And whether or not the prince and princess titles they inherited from King Charles would be next on the chopping block. Because if Meghan can be silenced, what's to stop the monarchy from erasing the next generation of Sussexes? The answer lies in a clause few people knew existed. A clause buried in Queen Elizabeth's letters patent from 2012. One that Meghan tried to invoke in 2021, and one that Charles is now reconsidering. Who is Meghan Markle? Is she the victimized Duchess fleeing royal toxicity, or the brand-savvy businesswoman who knows exactly when to flash the crown? Is she a silenced woman, or the loudest voice in the global media cycle? This is the contradiction that continues to define and derail her public life. And it's never been more exposed than in the aftermath of King Charles's title ban. Because as Meghan prepared her response to the palace's move, one question thundered across social media, talk shows, and op-eds. How can someone want nothing to do with royalty, but keep using their royal title? Let's be clear. This contradiction didn't begin with the Harper's Bazaar shoot. That was merely the spark, the final, polished moment that crystallized years of blurred lines. It started the day Meghan and Harry stepped back from royal duties in 2020. Remember the announcement? We intend to step back as senior members of the royal family and become financially independent. That line shook the monarchy. But what followed was even more jarring. While continuing to fully support Her Majesty the Queen, it was a statement crafted to have it both ways. To leave the institution, but keep its perks. To claim independence, while maintaining the association. To walk out of the palace, but hold on to the title on the way out. And for a while, it worked. Meghan and Harry landed explosive deals with Netflix and Spotify, book contracts, high-profile interviews, public speaking gigs. And through it all, the brand Duke and Duchess of Sussex floated like a royal halo above them. Subtle, but ever-present. Even in moments of scathing critique, like the Oprah interview, where Meghan described the royal family as indifferent, even cruel, she was still introduced as the Duchess of Sussex. Think about that. She was literally dismantling the institution while wearing its emblem on her chest. And the audience? They noticed. Some embraced the paradox, arguing that Meghan had earned her title through marriage and had every right to wield it however she pleased. But others saw something different. They saw duplicity, a woman playing both sides, rejecting the rules of royalty while cashing in on the prestige. And that tension only deepened over time. For example, let's talk about Archewell, Meghan and Harry's nonprofit foundation. Its website, branding, and press releases frequently referenced the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, often paired with intimate black and white portraits of the couple looking serious, noble, burdened by the weight of social responsibility. But here's the question. If you don't want to be seen as royal, why lead with a royal identity? Wouldn't Meghan and Harry have sent a clearer message of independence? Instead, they leaned into the mystique of their former lives, strategically, consistently, and lucratively. And let's not forget the children's book. In 2021, Meghan released The Bench, a picture book inspired by her relationship with Harry and Archie. On the cover, by Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. Not just Meghan Markle. Not even Meghan Windsor. No, the Duchess of Sussex. Again, this wasn't subtle. This was branding. A royal title used to sell books in Barnes & Noble and feature in glossy Oprah magazine spreads. So here's the tension. When Meghan does interviews, she often speaks as a modern woman, a humanitarian, a mother who escaped an archaic institution for her family's safety. But when she publishes, markets, promotes, she's royalty. And for millions of confused onlookers, The question is maddening. Which Meghan are we dealing with? Let's go even deeper. Meghan has repeatedly expressed her desire to be seen as a person, not a headline. She's spoken about the trauma of being objectified, silenced, misunderstood. But at the same time, she's curated a hyper-controlled, highly produced public image, complete with stylists, scripted podcasts, coordinated leaks, and media handlers trained in political strategy. She's not just seen, she's marketed. And this is where public perception fractures. Because people love authenticity, but they hate contradictions. And Meghan, whether by design or accident, often appears to be both. Take, for example, her appearance at the UN in 2022. She delivered a heartfelt speech on gender equality and global justice. Powerful, sincere. But guess what name she was introduced under? Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. Technically incorrect, deliberately powerful. It sent a message. I may have left the palace, but I still carry the crown. Now compare that to her Netflix docuseries, Harry and Meghan. In it, she and Harry portray themselves as two individuals who were suffocated by royal expectations, backstabbed by courtiers, and chased from the UK by a ruthless press. It's emotional, raw, and, again, highly branded. Throughout the series, we see archival footage of the Queen, headlines about the firm, clips from royal weddings. The whole thing is steeped in royalty. And yet the message is, we wanted out of this. It's a contradiction too glaring to ignore. Even staunch Meghan supporters have begun to ask uncomfortable questions. And Meghan knows it. Insiders say she's aware of the brand confusion surrounding her name, that her advisors have raised concerns over title usage, that public opinion is beginning to shift, not necessarily into hostility, but into doubt. Doubt is dangerous. It erodes loyalty, undermines messaging, weakens the base. And that's exactly what the palace is counting on. Because King Charles's directive to ban the public use of her title wasn't just a legal move, it was a psychological one. It forced Meghan to choose. You want to be free of us? Fine. Then you don't get to wear our name. You want to brand yourself as a modern woman? Great. Then drop the Duchess. The monarchy, in essence, called her bluff. And now, she has to decide. Is she Meghan Markle, the global entrepreneur, speaker, and activist? Or is she Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, the woman still orbiting the very institution she claims to have escaped? And here's the truth. She doesn't want to choose. Because the real power, until now, has been in having it both ways. Royal enough to sell a memoir. Modern enough to reject the rules. Classical enough to wear tiaras on Vogue covers. Progressive enough to slam royal protocol on podcasts. It's been a delicate dance. But now, the music's stopped, and the lights are on. The public sees the wires. The palace sees the strategy. And Meghan? She sees the cliff. Because the title ban is just the beginning. Charles may not be able to remove the Duchess title outright, not without Parliament, but he's already begun the process of erasing it from public discourse. And next, he's looking at Archie and Lilibet. Because now the question becomes, if Meghan can't use her title, why should the children inherit theirs? What's the benefit of letting two kids raised in California, without royal duties or British lives, carry titles funded by British taxpayers? It's a debate that's been bubbling for years. But now, with the Meghan precedent set, it's being fast-tracked. And that decision will be the one that finally forces Harry to choose. Because Meghan may be the face of this scandal, but he is the one with the bloodline. And if Charles threatens the children's titles, it won't just be a legal crisis. It will be a family war, one that could unravel every fragile thread holding this monarchy together. What happens when the very audience that once cheered for you suddenly starts questioning everything? What happens when sympathy turns into skepticism? When your defenders go silent and your critics get louder? That's exactly what unfolded in the days following King Charles's quiet but devastating move to ban Meghan Markle from publicly using the title Duchess of Sussex. The public's reaction wasn't just loud. It was divided. It was raw. And it exposed something the palace has long suspected but never dared say aloud. That the tide of public sentiment toward Meghan Markle had finally begun to shift. Let's start with the numbers. Within 72 hours of the Harper's Bazaar article going live, and the news of Meghan's formal title usage ban being leaked, social media exploded. Twitter, now X, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook lit up with hashtags like #NotYourDuchess, #Royal Rebrand Backfires, #Meghan versus the Monarchy, #Title Stripped. But one hashtag trended higher than all the rest. #Pick a side. That was the mood. That was the challenge. The public wanted answers. Because once again, Meghan had ignited a cultural war. One half saw her as a wronged woman unfairly punished by a cold, classist institution. The other? They saw her as a manipulator. A woman who wanted the glamour of royalty without the responsibility. Who cashed in on titles she claimed to despise. And for the first time in a long time. That second group was growing. Let's talk numbers. A YouGov Snap poll conducted the day after the title ban revealed some brutal truths. In the UK, 71% of respondents said they supported King Charles's decision to restrict Meghan's use of the Duchess title. 65% believed Meghan had used her title inappropriately or for self-promotion. Only 18% felt the monarchy was being unfair. But the real shock? The American numbers. For years, Meghan's support base in the United States had been her shield. Progressive media, liberal commentators, women's empowerment advocates. They had all rushed to defend her from the so-called British tabloid machine. But now, cracks were showing. In the U.S. poll, 47% of respondents said Meghan should no longer use royal titles in any public or commercial setting. 39% said they were unsure or confused about whether Meghan was still a working royal. Only 14% believed she was being targeted unfairly. That last number matters. Because perception is everything. And if the public no longer sees you as the underdog, but as the opportunist, the narrative collapses. So what changed? Why now? Why this moment? Simple, credibility fatigue. The public had been fed too many conflicting images for too long. Meghan, the silenced victim, who lands multi-million-dollar deals with global media giants. Meghan, the privacy-seeking mother, who releases a 6-part Netflix series filled with personal footage. Meghan, the anti-establishment voice, who continues to use a royal title to sell products, books, and ideas. It was too much. Even Oprah Winfrey, once one of Meghan's most high-profile supporters, reportedly declined to comment on the title ban when approached by journalists. A sign, perhaps, that even her inner circle was starting to back away from the fire. And then came the talk shows. You know the kind. Daytime chatterboxes, late-night satirists, TikTok hot take creators, and morning news panels filled with polished pundits. They tore into the story. Some laughed. Others analyzed. A few tried to defend her. But one exchange, in particular, went viral. On The View, during a heated panel discussion, co-host Sunny Hostin said, if she didn't want to be associated with the royal family, why is she still using the title? It's like quitting your job and still insisting on being called the CEO. Boom. That clip racked up over 3 million views in 48 hours. It struck a nerve. And it wasn't just TV. Influencers, especially in the UK and Australia, posted long-form videos unpacking Meghan's strategy, her contradictions, and the palace's bold response. These weren't troll attacks. They were thoughtful, frustrated breakdowns. And the recurring message? We believed you. But now we're just confused. Let's pause for a second. Because this confusion, this narrative collapse, is exactly what the palace has been waiting for. For years, Charles, William, and even the late Queen Elizabeth understood that fighting Meghan directly in the public arena was a losing game. She was too popular, too sympathetic, too American. But if they could wait, if they could hold steady while she overplayed her hand, the tide would turn on its own. And now it had. But here's where the twist comes in. Because while the general public began to lose patience with Meghan, her most diehard supporters doubled down. They accused Charles of racism, of controlling Meghan because she's strong and independent. They framed the title ban as proof that the royal family still doesn't accept outsiders. Some even revived old conspiracy theories. That Meghan was being set up from within the firm, or that royal courtiers were orchestrating a media campaign to destroy her credibility ahead of an upcoming project. And to be fair, they had ammo. Within hours of the title ban going public, an anonymous royal insider was quoted in the Times as saying, "This was always going to happen. Meghan doesn't know how to exist without a crown above her." Ouch. That quote was interpreted by many as cruel, calculated, and sexist. And Meghan's defenders pounced. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about a title. It was about power. It was about who gets to decide what a woman's identity is. A war of words had erupted, and it was spreading fast. But amid all the chaos, one moment stood out. And it happened on a podcast. Meghan's own. Archetypes. The episode, which had been recorded weeks earlier but aired just as the title firestorm was peaking, included a subtle but pointed comment. While discussing labels and expectations placed on women, Meghan said, "People love to put you in a box. And when you step out of it, when you say, 'No, I'm going to define myself on my own terms,' suddenly, you're the problem." She never mentioned the title ban. She didn't have to. The message was clear. And the reaction? Mixed. Some saw it as brave, defiant. Others saw it as tone-deaf. Another example of Meghan trying to reframe criticism as oppression. And then, the bombshell. Because just when the public thought they'd seen the peak of this drama, an old clip resurfaced. A clip from 2019. One that had gone largely unnoticed at the time. In it, Meghan is asked whether she feels prepared to give up her acting career, her independence, and her personal brand to become a duchess. Her response? "I think those titles are less about power and more about service. But yes, I'm ready to leave that part of my life behind." That sentence, spoken in a sit-down interview with the BBC before her wedding, was now being played on repeat. Social media erupted. Commentators asked, "So when did that commitment change? Was it a lie? Or did she simply change her mind? And if so, why keep the title? Why wear the crown when you've already walked away from the castle?" The clip's viral resurgence fueled a fresh wave of headlines. Meghan's words come back to haunt her. From service to strategy, what changed for the Duchess? The crown without the cause. The court of public opinion had returned. And this time, the jury was split down the middle. But amid all the noise, one thing was clear. The public's relationship with Meghan had changed. She was no longer just the woman who escaped the palace. She was now the woman caught between two worlds, clinging to the crown while denouncing its weight. And that contradiction? It wasn't just confusing anymore. It was exhausting. But the real storm was still on the horizon. Because while Meghan's title was the public battlefield, something else was brewing behind closed doors. A quiet legal move, a hidden letter, and a review of royal privileges not seen since the days of Edward VIII. Because now that Meghan's public image was faltering and her title usage suspended, the next target was obvious. The one thing even more controversial than Meghan herself. The royal status of Archie and Lilibet. And when word of that review leaked to the press, even Harry was blindsided.